was returned, and while Lenin read a book on Marx, the quartet practiced in the park, and we sang dirges in the dark.
Well, good day, listeners. We're here again at the Napkin Nation talking about Afghanistan. Now, we don't talk about this a lot. I think most recently it was in February of this year. It's now November of 1979. Back in February, some of our intermediate to longer time listeners may recall that in that time we were talking about the assassination of this guy, this dude from the U.S., Adolf Dubs. And that name probably doesn't ring a bell with most of you, but he was our ambassador to Afghanistan, right? And he was killed, whether it was by radical religious extremists or communists, I'm not sure. But we haven't really talked about this little country. You know, it's just in the middle of Africa, I think. Mr. Producer, am I right there? Africa, Afghanistan?
No, I think Afghanistan is more in the Middle East.
Okay. See, that's why we have our fact checker. You guys need to be informed. The Middle East, right? And one of the trends there they have is that they're pretty what's the term I should use? Primitive in their treatment of certain types of people, namely women. So a lot of social reforms are being made, or slow but steady were being made, and apparently some Soviets didn't too much appreciate that. So there was this meeting between Brezhnev and the president Taraki, and long story short, now Taraki's dead. However, it was not at the hands of the Soviets. Apparently, it was within his own government, carried out perhaps by, I think it's the Prime Minister and his men. So we're going to talk about this story in a lot more detail when we have, right after this upcoming break, we're going to have the esteemed longtime fan of the show. We've had him on multiple times, expert in the Africa and I assume the Middle East as well, I hope, Mr. Mitchell of the Mark. So right after this break, he'll be on. See you guys later.
And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, Daddy, don't. I called him up just the other day. I said I'd like to see you if you don't mind. He said I'd love to, Dad, if I could.
All right, all you wonderful listeners, welcome back. We're live once again on the Napkin Nation. This time with us is an esteemed guest, Dr. Mitchell of the Mark. He's very intelligent when it comes to Afghanistan, and I'm honored to call him a personal friend at this point. He's been on the show multiple times, and he's contributed a lot, so great to have you with us, Doc.
Oh, no, thank you, Dr. Napkin, for having me here. First off, I'd like to say that I'm really excited to talk to you today about Afghanistan.
Great, because you sure were helpful in commenting a lot on back when Dubs was assassinated. You know, that took me by surprise. I wasn't too researched, so we want to keep our audiences informed. But today, the issue seems to be that there's a lot of tension between the Soviets and the communists in Afghanistan. Afghanistan kind of wants to be its own independent thing. The communists want their own government, but the Soviet Union kind of wants it to be their own satellite state, which of course goes against some of the agreements, the first of the three baskets that we established, in which, they have to respect borders. But it wasn't always this way, was it? Why don't you take us back and explain how relationships started off?
It's really interesting. Back in 1956, while Khrushchev was still in power in the Soviet Union, he agreed to help Afghanistan. And so the two countries, the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, they became close allies. They became friends. Now, leading up to this, the first ideological communist in Afghan history, his name was Abdul Rahman Mahmoudi. He came into play in the country. He created the radical newspaper, the Nida Ye-Khalq, or the Voice of the Masses in English. And off of this newspaper, he created the political party, the Khalq, or the Masses. And this was the first the first major leftist party in Afghanistan. And this was one of those links between the Afghanistan and the Soviet Union that helped them to form close ties. Now,
Right. Because why wouldn't they support, global communism? We've got
Exactly.
other people being all like, "Oh, we're about the masses. The masses. It's always about the people. We want to
Yep.
help. We want to help as many people as we can. Spread the message." But as we know, things tend to change. So when
Yep.
they actually come into power after the assassination, the coup d'état of
Yep.
what
the
was it?
assassination of Daoud Khan.
Right. He was the president of the republic
Mm-hmm.
after they kicked the king out. So what can you tell us that happened after they kicked him out and we had these radicals take over the government?
Well, following the coup d'état, the assassination of Mr. Khan here, the Soviet-supported leftist, his name is Taraki, Mohammad Taraki, he became president, and Hafizullah Amin, he was another guy, he became prime minister. Now, this was a communist government, Mr. Amin and Mr. Taraki. They were set up by the Soviet government. They were supported by the Soviet government. But Taraki was a lot closer to the Soviet Union, and he was a lot more of a hardliner communist than Amin was. And the Soviets didn't like Amin too much. So the Soviets and Taraki had a plan to kick Amin out, or I should rather say kill him, because they wanted a more hardliner communist in power. Now, Amin, he predicted this. He was wary all along of this, and
I think wasn't it he actually had like an agent who
yes,
listened to
he
the
had an
conversation?
agent that sort of spied on Taraki and the Soviet Union.
I
That's
heard
kind of how he. That's
Heard
kind of
about
how he
that.
knew.
It was a meeting with Brezhnev.
Mm-hmm.
He met with him shortly after the non-aligned conference in
Yes.
Havana, Cuba. But continue.
Yes. Now, Amin knew that Taraki and the Soviet Union were plotting to kill him, so he went one step ahead of them, and he allegedly assassinated Taraki by suffocating him. Now,
Suffocation.
you would think that wouldn't go over too well with the masses, but the thing is, Amin made it public that Taraki died of an undisclosed illness, so
Right.
of course that occupied the masses for some time.
Okay, so that brings us up to this current situation where Amin's in power and he's not really trustworthy of
No,
the Soviets. right?
The Soviets are trying to work with Amin, but it's really shaky right now.
Right. Okay. So what are some of your predictions just going forward? I mean, it seems like the Soviets are just, as the Soviets do, being power hungry. They want more land. This is what I stress to my listeners all the time. You can't trust them. They're always just hungry for more. Global communism, and this is why the Cold War is significant to me. But
Yeah.
what do you think's going to happen?
Well, here's the thing. You are definitely on track with the nature of the Soviet Union, how they always want to, be in power. And honestly, who doesn't want to be in power? But, the Soviet Union tend to be a little bit more aggressive than most, especially with Brezhnev in power right now.
Right.
So, taking this aggressiveness in mind, I do believe that with the whole shaky relationship between Amin and the Soviet Union, I think that the Soviets are going to put the whole situation into their hands themselves. I think they might actually, now don't get me wrong, this is just a possibility, but I think they're actually going to invade Afghanistan to try and just forcefully take power again.
Because they have had a presence for quite some time, haven't they?
They have, yes. They've had a lot of influence over the years in Afghanistan, the Soviets, right? They influenced a lot of things in Afghanistan, but they never really directly, intervened anywhere in Afghanistan. I think that the relationships now between the government in Afghanistan and the Soviet Union now, I think that's shaky enough to actually warrant the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. Now,
All right, I want to cut you off there because we
Yep.
got a break coming up soon. But 3 questions. 1, how many Soviet troops are going to die?
Thousands, hundreds, thousands.
All right, you heard it here first, guys. How much is this going to cost?
It's going to cost a lot, seriously. I mean, Afghanistan is a fairly near country, but it's not, it's not super near. And, it's just going to take a lot of money to send the troops there, to feed them and such. So it's going to take a lot of money.
All right, and I'm going to throw in my own final prediction actually here. I'm thinking the U.S. is going to do something. We're going to side with the Afghanis. We're not going to the Soviets.
Oh yeah,
and
no. You've
we're
got
gonna-
you know you've got the whole U.S. attitude with stop communism, stop the
Yeah.
spread of communism. So what's going to happen is I think they're going to start some sort of revolutionary force in Afghanistan to try and stop the Soviets from taking power.
Right, and my only fear with that, of course, is weapons could get into the wrong hands. They've got radical religious. It's some sect of Taoism over there. Or something. It's prone to extremism apparently. But anyways, that just about does it for this segment. Thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Mitchell of the Mark. It's always a pleasure to have you.
And it's a pleasure for me too, Dr. Napkin.
All right. Right after this break, we'll be back with more on Afghanistan. Keep it right here at the Napkin Nation.